So with Captain Underpants about to come out, I decided to do my top 10 best DreamWorks animation movies. Now, when it comes to animated movies, DreamWorks have been hit and miss lately. Most of their animated movies have been really good, but some of them, not so good. I'm here today to count down the top 10 best DreamWorks animation movies. And just a heads up, I do this all the time when I do a top 10 video. None of this is fact, it's just my opinion, so don't go in the comments and be like, why is that movie not on there? This is just my opinion, so if you don't agree with me, that's fine. But before I get the top 10 list started, here are some honorable mentions. Madagascar. Mr. Peabody and Sherman. Over the Hedge. Puss in Boots. And Spirit, Stallion of the Cimarron. Let's start with number 10, and number 10 is Chicken Run. When I was a little kid, I watched Chicken Run for the first time, and I didn't really get into it that much, but when I watched it a few years ago, I was like, okay, this is actually pretty good. Chicken Run is one of my favorite DreamWorks movies because it's self-aware of itself. The story doesn't make any sense. Like, Chicken's trying to escape this farm, and they treat it like it's some World War II prison camp, and that doesn't make sense, but the movie knows that. And this movie has a ton of British humor in it, and if you love British humor like Monty Python, Shaun the Dead, Hot Fuzz, World's End, you will love this movie. And Mel Gibson voices a rooster in this movie. How can you not love that? Alright, let's move on to number 9, and number 9 is The Prince of Egypt. Think of The Prince of Egypt this way. Think of an animated version of the 10 Commandments. Does that sound awesome? If it does, you will love this movie. The Prince of Egypt has some of the most beautiful animation DreamWorks has ever put in any of their movies. And The Prince of Egypt also has a surprise voice cast. Val Kilmer, Ralph Fiennes, Michelle Pfeiffer, Sandra Bullock, Jeff Goldblum, Patrick Stewart, Danny Glover, Helen Mirren, Steve Martin, and Martin Short. Yes, Steve Martin is in a movie about Moses. So, if you really love the story of Moses and if you think it should be put in an animated movie, you will love The Prince of Egypt. Alright, let's move on to number 8. And number 8 is Megamind. When Megamind first came out, people said it was too similar to Despicable Me and The Incredibles. Which, in some ways, it is, but I actually really like Megamind. Megamind is definitely one of DreamWorks' most surprisingly touching movies. Like, this movie kind of has like a surprising, heartwarming message to it. And Will Ferrell, yes, he does voice Megamind, and it is some of the best voice work in any animated movie. Will Ferrell was born to voice Megamind. Alright, let's move on to number 7. And number 7 is Madagascar 3, Europe's Most Wanted. The Madagascar franchise is one of DreamWorks' most underrated movie franchises. The first Madagascar I love. The second one I thought was good, but maybe one of the more weaker movies. But the third one I think is the best one. It definitely has the most touching story and message out of all the movies. And it definitely has the best animation out of all the Madagascar movies. The one issue that really bugged me about Madagascar 3 was the ending. I'm not going to spoil it just in case if you haven't seen it, but just the ending just frustrated me. Alright, let's move on to number 6. And number 6 is Kung Fu Panda 2. This may come to you guys as a surprise, but I find the first Kung Fu Panda overrated. I never got into it. The story didn't really hook me up. I thought the characters were kind of dull, and the villain was a little weak. I didn't really give a crap about the villain, but I did love the animation, and Jack Black was born to play Poe. Like, he is hilarious as that character. But Kung Fu Panda 2, I think, surpasses the first Kung Fu Panda movie in every way. Kung Fu Panda 2, I think, has a better story, more beautiful animation, better voice cast because it got Gary Oldman to voice the villain, who I think is a lot better than the first movie's villain, and it's surprisingly sad. So in Kung Fu Panda 2, there's a flashback where they explain what happens to Poe's mom, and it is so sad. Like, I remember when Kung Fu Panda first came out, I didn't see it in the theaters, I saw it a few years later. I heard people were actually crying during it. Yes, Kung Fu Panda 2 starring Jack Black made people cry. So if you never got into the first Kung Fu Panda movie like me, I recommend giving the second one a shot. I think it's a lot better than the first one. I still haven't seen the third one. I didn't see the third one because it didn't look that great, to be honest. Alright, let's move on to number 5. And number 5 is Wallace and Gromit, The Curse of the Rare Rabbit. When I was a little kid growing up, I loved the Wallace and Gromit shorts, and I still do to this day. And yes, of course, I do love The Curse of the Rare Rabbit. Do I like it more than the shorts? I may have to think about it. Just like with Chicken Run, Curse of the Rare Rabbit is self-aware of itself. Usually in horror movies, you see like a werewolf, but in this movie, it's a rare rabbit. That is hilarious. And Wallace gets cursed by a rabbit, and he, like, whenever the full moon shows up, he turns into the were-rabbit. It makes no sense, but that's what makes this movie so good. I guess if I did have at least one teensy-weensy nitpick with this movie, is that the villain, Victor, who is voiced by Ralph Fiennes, he's a little weak. I suppose he could have been more interesting and more compelling, but for what this movie goes, he was fine. Alright, let's move on to number 4. And number 4 is Shrek 2. The way I see it, there are two types of people. People who think Shrek 2 is better than the first one, and people who think Shrek 2 is not quite as good as the first one. I think Shrek 2 is just as great as the first one. I will say this, the one thing that Shrek 2 did improve on the first one is it's funnier. I mean, the first Shrek is hilarious, don't get me wrong, but I think the second one is just a little bit more funnier. And of course, like the first Shrek movie, Shrek 2 has one of the best soundtracks in movie history. Alright, let's move on to number 3. And number 3 is How to Train Your Dragon. Talk about the ultimate don't judge a book by its cover movie. How to Train Your Dragon. That title on paper is awful, but when you watch the actual movie, you will love it. I remember when How to Train Your Dragon first came out back in 2010, I thought it looked terrible. The marketing for this movie was crap, and I avoided it for many years, but I remember when the second one was about to be released, I finally got a chance to watch it, and I was blown away. It was freaking great. And screw it, I'll be the one to say it. I think How to Train Your Dragon has the best animation out of all of the DreamWorks animated movies. Alright, let's move on to number 2. And number 2 is How to Train Your Dragon 2. Now this is a sequel that takes the franchise to a whole nother level. Just like with Empire Strikes Back and The Godfather Part 2, How to Train Your Dragon 2 does the same thing. Raise your hand if you think How to Train Your Dragon 2 is better than the first one. I think we can all agree on this. And of course, huge spoiler coming. So if you haven't seen How to Train Your Dragon 2, I recommend you cover your ears or turn down the volume. When Stoic died, I teared up. I didn't cry, but I just got really emotional. I was like, no. And I cannot wait for How to Train Your Dragon 3 to come out. I can't wait for what DreamWorks is going to do with its franchise next. Alright, let's move on to number one. And my number one best DreamWorks animated movie is Shrek. I know a lot of people would pick How to Train Your Dragon as the best DreamWorks animated movie, but I'm sorry. I'm going with Shrek. Shrek was the movie that put DreamWorks on the map as one of the studios to look out for when it comes to animation. And I do think Shrek has one of the best lessons in any movie. Like, if you don't know, the lesson in Shrek is you don't have to be a Prince Charming or like a handsome prince, like have your own happy ending. Like, even if you're a big, ugly, smelly ogre, you can still have a happy ending. And I think that's a lesson that the other Disney princess movies like cannot have for some reason. And speaking of Shrek, Shrek is love. Shrek is life. Alright guys, that's it for my top 10 best DreamWorks animation movies. And I have a question for you guys. Are you guys excited for Captain Underpants? Or what are your top 10 best DreamWorks animation movies? Whatever they are, comment below and let me know. And if you want to see more videos, just be sure to subscribe.